I'm a historian, so it seems fitting that my life should end the same way. I may not die, of course. I seem to have had a seizure at my favorite bar in the harbor. My head hurts like hell. I guess there are worse ways to die. I just had a nice meal and a pint of my favorite beer. A lot of men would be happy to meet their maker after that. It's a shame I had to listen to Alex Mortimer talk about how well my favorite wife, Alina, is screwing. How spectacular her tits are and her wonderfully sensitive nipples. She was a great kisser and blousy. After 32 years of marriage, I knew all that, of course. I would have been happy to die without knowing that someone else knew it too. What I didn't know, however, was how good the sex was taking her from behind. She had refused to do it since the early years of our marriage. She found it degrading and it hurt her knees. Apparently, she could get over the pain if it was with a 19-year-old boy, a boy I used to teach. Of course, I may not die. I may survive. If I live, I'll teach Alex Mortimer a lesson he'll never forget. The little bastard. I don't usually go to the pub alone. I usually go with friends or Alina. She was visiting her parents for the evening, so to save myself from cooking, I decided on a pub meal. Steak and chips if anyone is interested. I'm a history teacher at a local high school in North Yorkshire. I've been there for over 30 years. I often teach the children of children I have previously taught. I haven't taught any grandchildren yet, but it probably won't be long now. I saw Alex Mortimer and his partner Kieran Yates leaning on the bar. I did a quick mental calculation and realized it was about 3 years since I had last taught them. They were over 18, so they could drink. After eating, I went over to chat with them to see what they were doing now. Turns out they both worked at the cookie factory, like Alina. It was a casual conversation, but the more they drank, the more talkative they became. And that's when Alex started sharing details I never wanted to hear. As I lay there, my vision blurring and my head throbbing, snippets of our conversation replayed in my mind. Alex's voice, slurred with alcohol, detailing Alina's newfound sexual exploits, echoed painfully. The betrayal stung worse than the physical pain I was enduring. I had always known our marriage wasn't perfect, but to hear such vivid confirmation of her infidelity from a former student was unbearable. Between the waves of pain, I thought back to happier times with Alina when we were younger and our love was passionate and uncomplicated. Those memories felt distant now, overshadowed by the harsh reality of our present situation. I struggled to reconcile the woman I loved with the one Alex described. If I survived this, I knew things would never be the same. I felt a sudden surge of anger amidst the pain. If I pulled through, I was determined to confront both Alex and Alina. I wouldn't let this betrayal go unchallenged. Alex might think he could humiliate me, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. As a historian, I had seen the rise and fall of empires. This was my personal war, and I intended to fight back. The thought of my students, the next generation of historians, also crossed my mind. I couldn't leave them without imparting all the knowledge I had accumulated over the years. Teaching was my passion, and I couldn't bear the thought of my career ending like this. I had more to give, more stories to tell, more lives to touch. The bar's noise started to fade as darkness edged in, but I clung to consciousness, fueled by a mix of rage and resolve. The future seemed uncertain, but if I had any say in it, I would rise from this with my dignity intact and justice served. As I waited for help, I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. Perhaps fate was on my side, granting me another chance. Another chapter in my life's history was about to begin, and I was ready to face it head-on. They were in the workshop, but she was working as the general manager's secretary. Kieran let out a chuckle over his beer when I asked if they knew her. Alex said he'd seen her a couple of times when he had to report to the boss. We laughed for a while, and I made sure to buy them a drink during our chat. I said goodbye and, on my way out, decided to go to the bathroom. I was just getting settled when I heard the two boys come in. I don't know how you can be so calm about it, Alex. Mr. Moore is a nice guy. He just bought us both a pint. He was the best teacher I ever had. I hated history until we had him. How can you talk to him so normally when you're shagging his missus? Because I think he's a brilliant guy, too. I'm not doing anything to hurt him. I really like him. I really do. I just like sucking on Mrs. Moore's big old tits more. I bet it is, laughed Kieran, although it's still wrong. Look, I'm doing him a favor, buddy. It's not my fault he can't get it up anymore, is it? I'm just his double. I'm giving him something he can't. And believe me, if it wasn't me, it'd be someone else. I'm not a threat to his marriage, am I? A 53-year-old woman isn't going to want to run away with me any more than I'd want to run away with her. Better me than an older guy who could be a real threat. I'm doing them both a favor. I still think he's a good guy. You want to see his artifact collection? He's got some really cool stuff in his man cave. You'd love it. Suddenly, Alex and Kieran were excited about my toys, like the kids they still were, excited about my artifacts, as was my wife. The thing with Mrs. Moore is sex, pure and simple, fantastic sex, but that's about it. After talking some more about the delights of my wife's body, they were gone. The tingling in my body was getting worse and worse. Luckily, soon after, someone else came in, and I managed to get their attention. I thought I was telling them to call an ambulance. That's what it sounded like in my head, but not in reality. Luckily, they understood I wasn't just a drunk. They called an ambulance, and now I'm in the hospital. I lay back on my pillow and thought about Alina and me. We had been married for 32 years. We were married on the 21st of Alina. We had no children. That was a disappointment for me, but not for Alina. She didn't want children. I did, but I loved Alina more. End of story. She was enough for me. She always was. I thought I was enough for her. I was, until I wasn't. Not having children allowed us to travel and do whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted. It gave us a sense of freedom that other couples our age with children to support did not have. It also gave us some extra income to play with. Although we weren't rich, we had kept the mortgage low and had paid it off years ago. We had a nice house. It wasn't huge, but we didn't need that much space for the two of us. In fact, we didn't even need the 2 guest rooms. Alina had one as a dressing room. She had beautiful clothes and liked to look nice. The other room was my cave. I have always had a passion for history, and there I kept my collection of military maps, memorabilia, and other artifacts. Lying in that hospital bed, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss and betrayal. The life Alina and I had built together felt like a fragile illusion, now shattered by her infidelity. As the doctors and nurses moved around me, I drifted in and out of consciousness, my thoughts a jumble of past and present. I remembered the early days of our marriage, the excitement of our travels, the quiet evenings spent in each other's company. I had always believed those moments would be enough to sustain us, that our love was strong enough to withstand the trials of time. But hearing Alex's crass words, realizing that Alina had found solace in the arms of someone else, was a bitter pill to swallow. Despite the pain, a part of me still clung to the hope that this was all a terrible dream, that I would wake up and find Alina by my side, the woman I had loved for so long, still faithful and true. But deep down, I knew the truth. Our marriage, once a sanctuary, was now a prison of unspoken regrets and unfulfilled desires. The days passed slowly in the hospital. Friends and colleagues visited, their faces a mix of concern and pity. I tried to put on a brave front, but the weight of my thoughts was crushing. Alina came to see me once, her eyes red with tears. She apologized over and over, but her words felt hollow. The bond we had shared was broken, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. As I recovered, I made a decision. I needed to reclaim my life, to find a new purpose beyond the pain and betrayal. I would return to teaching, to the passion that had always given me joy. I would rebuild my artifact collection, perhaps even write a book about the history I loved so much. I would find a way to move forward, even if it meant leaving Alina behind. The day I was discharged from the hospital, I returned to our home. It felt empty, a shell of the place it once was. I walked through the rooms, memories flooding back with each step. In my cave, I sat down and looked at my collection, the pieces of history that had always brought me comfort. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I was determined to face it head on. I would take it one day at a time, one step at a time, and maybe, just maybe, I would find a way to heal. Alina and I had shared a lifetime together, but now it was time for me to write a new chapter, one where I was the master of my own fate. As I looked out the window at the setting sun, I felt a glimmer of hope. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. My collection of artifacts and relics might seem overwhelming at first glance, but I assure you, it's more organized than it appears. Every piece had its role in my lessons, serving as tools of my trade. Alina appreciated that I managed to keep my collection contained, preventing my hobby from taking over the entire house. Teaching was my passion, and though I knew not everyone shared my enthusiasm for history, I made it my mission to make it as engaging and relevant as possible for my students. I prided myself on being able to transform what some considered a dry subject into something lively and fun. I wasn't trying to brag, but my popularity among the students occasionally sparked some professional jealousy. However, I could handle it. Even if the kids liked me more than the subject, they were still learning, and that's what mattered. I was an ordinary-looking guy who kept in shape, but Alina always looked beautiful to me. She was a normal-looking young woman who aged remarkably well, always possessing a figure that drew attention. When we first met, she praised me for always looking her in the eye, unlike other men who couldn't take their eyes off her chest. Truth be told, I was quite skilled at sneaking glances whenever she looked away. Her figure had captivated me from the moment we met 34 years ago. I cherished her, and hearing anyone disrespect her made my blood boil. Our sex life had always been vibrant, unlike many couples who lose interest over time. We maintained the same passion well into our 30s and 40s, our appetites for each other never waning. With no children to divert our attention, we continued to explore and keep things exciting, indulging in role-playing and plenty of oral sex. This harmony persisted until Alina hit her 40s and menopause struck hard. Our once thriving love life came to an abrupt halt. I wasn't even allowed to touch her. Any attempt to hold her was met with accusations of insensitivity. As a loving husband, I tried my best to support her, but it was tough transitioning from a full sex life to none at all for 2 years. I suggested moving to my man cave to give her space and comfort, thinking she'd appreciate the gesture. She could set the room temperature to her liking without worrying about my advances. Selfishly, it was also difficult for me to be near her without the intimate contact we once had. The sight of her undressing, her scent as she lay beside me, it was all torture. Plus, I was freezing as she kept the window open, even in the dead of winter, to combat her constant heat. When I brought up the idea of moving out temporarily, she saw it as a rejection. I was labeled uncaring and cruel. So I stayed, freezing and frustrated, yet committed to being a supportive husband in my own flawed way. Miraculously, at 52, Alina stabilized. The turbulence of menopause finally passed, and life began to return to some semblance of normalcy. The dreaded menopause fairy had moved on to claim her next victim, leaving us to rebuild what we had lost. Miriam had emerged from menopause with some extra curves that truly enhanced her natural beauty. Unlike many women, the menopause fairy had not only left Alina with those lovely curves, but also blessed her with a renewed sexual desire. Unfortunately, during those intervening years, I seemed to have lost my ability to maintain an erection, though my desire remained. At first, I chalked it up to lack of use, but it turned out to be erectile dysfunction. My doctor at the time was young and utterly indifferent. He neither reassured me nor helped alleviate my embarrassment. Clearly, he thought an older man like me shouldn't worry about such things. He coldly explained that it was a side effect of my stress medication and that I had to live with it. His matter-of-fact attitude left me mortified, embarrassed, and belittled. It had taken all my courage to ask for help, and his response was crushing. Determined to find a solution, I thought strategically. I could either abstain from lovemaking altogether or discover a new way to be intimate with my wife. My pleasure became her pleasure. After all, I still had my hands and my tongue, didn't I? I had missed the closeness and intimacy with Alina for so long, and I wasn't about to lose that again. We continued to make love, just differently. They say the largest sex organ is the brain, and we made love 2 or 3 times a week. Alina experienced many orgasms, and it wasn't just about her pleasure. I regained some confidence and pride, knowing I could still give her so much joy. For penetrative sex, I willingly used toys with her, satisfying that need. My only male pride was that these toys were used exclusively when we were together. Silly, I know, but I needed to feel like they were an extension of me. She had other toys for her own use, if she needed them. I believed we were happy. I thought keeping her satisfied was enough. For me, I rediscovered the pleasure of being held, caressed, and kissed. I felt desired, and Alina felt wanted. I thought that was sufficient. I was wrong. When I had the stroke, the doctors quickly identified it as ischemic and promptly prescribed a combination of drugs to prevent further damage and another stroke. Fortunately, I regained my voice, though initially I struggled to find the right words. A lovely nurse named Louise informed me that Alina had been contacted and was a couple of hours away. I managed to tell her I didn't want to see Alina under any circumstances. Louise initially thought my request was part of my confusion until she saw my blood pressure rising dramatically. I asked her to call my sister instead. She was local and would arrive long before Alina. My older sister, Margaret, was a force to be reckoned with. Standing at 6 feet 3 inches in her socks, size 9, by the way, she had always protected me as a child, and I knew she would be there for me now. It felt like only minutes after they called her that she arrived. Nurse Louise asked if she had flown. "Only on my bike, love. It's a Kawasaki. It flies when I need it to." With that, she enveloped me in the biggest hug and wiped a tear from her cheek. "You big fool. You made me cry. Scare me like that again, and I'll kill you myself." We all laughed, even Nurse Louise. I told our Margaret everything that had happened and what I had overheard. I didn't mind Louise hearing it either. Margaret reassured me, "I'll make sure he doesn't come in to see you. I have to ensure you remain as calm as possible. You might also want to name your sister as next of kin on the hospital forms." "Actually, the law doesn't define it. You can name whomever you want," Louise interjected. "Well, I'm his closest blood relative," Margaret asserted. "We only have each other now." Later, I learned that Alina was far from amused to hear that I didn't want to see her. Of course, she didn't know why. She made quite a fuss. I don't blame her. She was undoubtedly very worried about me. Deep in my heart, I knew she still loved me. Her concern for me marked the beginning of her punishment. I knew I had to talk to her. There was no way I was ending 32 years of marriage without a discussion. However, I had no doubt that the marriage was over. I might have become a cuckold, but I was certain that I wouldn't willingly or knowingly continue to be one. Alina eventually saw our Margaret, who was waiting for her in the hospital parking lot. I told Margaret to say whatever she needed to say, but nothing more. When Alina finished crying and checked that I was out of danger, she demanded to know why I didn't want to see her. Margaret simply responded, "You almost killed my brother with your shenanigans, you dirty bitch. Don't ever speak to me again." With that, she pulled down her visor and rode off into the night. After I was discharged from the hospital, I went to stay at Margaret's house. She still lived in our mom's bungalow, which I had partly owned after our mom passed away. I was released with a detailed list of instructions for my rehabilitation. Fortunately, I had recovered enough to be home, but I would need ongoing therapy and support to continue improving. After just a day at Margaret's house, I asked her to invite Alina over. I needed to have the conversation I had been avoiding for so long. I needed to hear what she had to say. I'd like to say that a small part of me could forgive her. I had loved her for so long, and in a way, I still did, the woman I thought she was, at least. However, I knew I was a stubborn, unforgiving Yorkshire man. Coupled with my male pride and ego, I didn't think I was capable of forgiveness, even if I wanted to. I needed to be able to look at myself in the mirror with some pride, and at that moment, I couldn't. I asked Margaret to make herself scarce. She disappeared on her bike, leaving the door closed so Alina could come in. Alina looked worse than I did. Her eyes were puffy from crying, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Trevor, I don't know whether to kiss you or slap you. Do you have any idea how worried I've been about you? If you thought you were saving me aggravation by not letting me see you, you were wrong. I can't eat. I can't sleep." "All about how it affects you then, Alina?" I shot back. "No, but I don't know why you would be so cruel," she replied, tears brimming in her eyes. "You know why, Alina. Think about it. I know you've been pondering what Margaret said. What could you have done that would upset me enough to send me to the hospital? And Margaret refused to talk to you. I'll give you a hint. Alex Mortimer." I watched as she visibly flinched at the mention of his name, before quickly composing herself. "What's wrong with him?" Alina asked, her voice trembling. "He's just a dumb kid at work," I replied. "A dumb kid you're banging. How did you know?" she stammered. "I've been so careful." "Well, not careful enough to sleep with someone mature enough to be discreet," sadly. "I heard him telling his mate Kieran what a good shagger you are, how he loves kissing on your big old tits." The look of horror on his face was a picture. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that. It must have been horrible for you," she said, her face contorting with shame. "Well, it was bad enough to send me to the hospital," I shot back, my voice shaking with emotion. "Oh, honey, you shouldn't have let it bother you. It was nothing. He doesn't mean anything. He means nothing to me, to us. I don't feel anything for him, except lust. It was like another sex toy. You were still keeping me satisfied in your own way. Very satisfied, actually. It's just that something was missing. When I got the chance to have a flesh and blood cock, not just a hard piece of plastic, I couldn't resist." "You couldn't or wouldn't. You left me 2 years without sex. 2 years. I could have gone out for some flesh and blood pussy. Couldn't I? It wasn't my fault. It was menopause," she tried to reason, her voice breaking. At that moment, I lost my mind. It wasn't my fault either. It was because I was sick. In sickness and in health, remember that thing about giving up everything else? Does that ring a bell? It was okay that I was dissatisfied, but you weren't. Is that it? My God, your selfishness is unbelievable. The real difference is that you left me hanging with no affection, no hugs, no kisses, no nothing for 2 years. I still loved you. I was still there for you. You threw me away for 2 years and completely rejected me. You abandoned me, Alina, and now you've done it again." She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Imagine how I felt, listening to a couple of kids laughing at my wife, talking about her like she was a street whore, talking about my most personal medical situation, laughing because she won't get up, doing things with him that you hadn't done with me in years. In my own house? You even let that little shit into my man cave. What normal is this, Alina? Normal when you screwed teenagers in our bed, or normal when I had a faithful and devoted wife? I don't quite know how you're going to become disenchanted if you choose the latter. Now you're being clumsy. You're coming home with me. I want to. No, I need to take care of you. I can't bear to be away from you when you need me, Alina insisted, her voice trembling. I'm not coming home, Alina, and I certainly don't need you. I want you. I can't help it. I really wish I could, but I don't need you, and I certainly don't want you. You don't mean that, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I do. You don't seem to be aware of what you have done to me, to our marriage, or to our love. The fact that you seem to dismiss your actions as nothing important tells me all I need to know. Our views and needs are too far apart. I'm surprised you haven't even apologized. I'll be honest with you. You deserve it after all these years. If you had thrown yourself at my mercy and begged for forgiveness, I doubt it would have changed anything. We'll never know, though, will we? Basically, you don't feel you did anything wrong. You're sorry I found out, but you're not sorry you did it. That's why our marriage is over, and that's why I'm divorcing you. You took something very precious to me, and you trashed it without any real consideration. I can no longer give you what you need, so I release you so you can have all the flesh and blood cocks you need. I also release myself, since apparently being married to you is too dangerous to my health. It would have been a great sentence to end this conversation, but of course, real life isn't like that. Alina wasn't finished yet. You're being ridiculous. There will be no divorce. You're coming home with me. Now, I love you and I need you. You can't throw 32 years of marriage away over this. I can't believe you're being so selfish. It was nothing. It was nothing. Well, that's the problem, Alina. It was something for me. The level of disrespect you've shown me in my own freaking house? Unbelievable. Am I being selfish? Now back off before you take another swing at me. Shortly after she left, I heard Margaret return on her motorcycle. She drove to the garage, but did not enter the house. I went into the garage to tell her what had happened. She was tightening a screw on the rear license plate. Don't ask, she smiled. I've just been preparing a little gift for my favorite brother, Hermano Unico. Well, you'd still be my favorite. What did my former sister-in-law have to say, gushing apologies? Not exactly. No, I don't think so. She's always been an entitled bitch. Not that you could see that. Come on, boy. Onward and upward. I'll make a cup of tea. A couple of days later, I read in the local paper that Alex Mortimer, 19, had fallen down the stairs in the apartment complex where he lived. The news didn't surprise me, but it did make me think about the twists and turns of life and how quickly things can change. What have I ever done to you other than love you? What have I ever done to you to deserve this level of disrespect? It wasn't like that. You're misrepresenting it. I wasn't disrespecting you. I was just using him. It didn't affect my love for you in any way. It was separate. It was sex, that's all. Just sex. So no tenderness, no real intimacy, I pressed. Yes, that's exactly it. Just the physical act, she admitted, her voice hollow. I waited until she looked me in the eye. Alina, you're delusional. Isn't there real intimacy? I think letting another person into your body is probably the most intimate thing you can do. What about kissing? What about kissing? Are you worried about kissing? She snorted. You know, historically, prostitutes didn't kiss their clients because it was considered too intimate. Are you saying I'm a prostitute? I've only slept with 2 men in my entire life, you and him. Is that supposed to reassure me? I'm not saying you're a prostitute, Alina. I have more respect for sex workers than I do for you right now, I said, feeling my anger rising. Look, enough of this. Now you're being nasty. You're starting to piss me off, Trevor. Go get your stuff. You're coming home with me now. We need to put all this nonsense behind us and get back to our lives, she demanded, her tone shifting to one of command. But I knew better. This wasn't something we could simply put behind us. Our lives had changed irreversibly, and there was no going back to the way things were. Alex Mortimer, 19, had an unfortunate incident in the old town. He tumbled down those dark, narrow stairs wedged between a row of Georgian terraces leading to the promenade. These stairs were notorious among late-night revelers, often reeking of urine from drunken escapades. Poor Alex ended up with a broken leg, collarbone, numerous ribs, and was soaked in urine. What a shame. The newspaper had a picture of him, looking a complete mess. Wasn't it lucky that it had happened when I was with Alina? And wasn't it even luckier that the police hadn't found a possible witness to the accident yet? A tall guy wearing biker leathers? Thank you for my gift, I said, handing the paper to Margaret. I have no idea what you're talking about, she smirked, playing innocent. This is your gift from me. I opened the box she gave me and found a small selection of World War I medals. I thought you might like them. I found them in a store in the old town. Alina and I eventually divorced, of course. She put up quite a fight, seemingly unable to grasp that I couldn't handle her infidelity. After we sold the house, we both bought apartments at opposite ends of town. Surprisingly, our paths crossed very little. I went back to work and struggled through the first Christmas alone. I made a spectacle of myself at a work event, drowning my sorrows. One of the younger colleagues, Darren, took me home and I poured out my story. His reaction and support reassured me that any man would have done the same in my position. Margaret and I spent a lot of time together until she moved to Greece. I visited her on vacations, but life became a bit dull for a while. At 65, I met a new neighbor, Brenda. We became good friends, then companions, and eventually something more. We fell in love, and our intimacy grew until we were sharing a bed and making love in our own way. One night, quite early in this new phase of our relationship, something unexpected happened, literally. We certainly didn't let it go to waste. I rushed to the doctor to see if it was a one-time thing. He was an older doctor, surprised to learn that I had received so little support in the past. He was saddened to hear that my erectile dysfunction had played a major role in the end of my first marriage. With his help and a slight change in medication, getting and maintaining an erection was no longer a problem. Everything was solved when we went on our honeymoon. That was 10 years ago. Brenda and I are now 75 and still very much in love. Alina never remarried, as far as I know. She moved away after I remarried, and the last time I saw her, she was very bitter. There was a hardness and meanness in her that hadn't been there before. It was right after Brenda and I got engaged. We were sitting in our favorite cafe, savoring a quiet moment together when Alina walked by. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief second, I saw a flash of the woman I had once loved. But then, the bitterness returned, and she walked away without a word. We were sitting in our favorite coffee shop, enjoying a quiet cup of coffee when Alina showed up unexpectedly. I introduced Brenda to Alina, and Alina, with a spiteful glint in her eye, said something that took my breath away. "Well, I hope you can live without full sex, since he hasn't been able to get it hard for years." Brenda, unfazed and quick-witted, replied with a smirk, "I think maybe I just needed the right woman, my dear. You certainly presented me with something very hard this morning before breakfast." Alina's face turned a shade of crimson as she looked at me in disbelief. "Really?" "Yes, really, Alina. Turns out I just needed to be with someone loving and selfless who really cared about me," I said calmly. With that, Alina stormed off, her jealousy palpable. "Jealousy is a terrible thing," I mused. "I know that. I felt it once very severely. Hopefully I found what I wanted." Oddly enough, Alex Mortimer, the very person who had been part of the scandal that tore my first marriage apart, is now our mailman. Nearly 40 years old, he looked horrified when he saw me open the door to our apartment that first time. He apologized profusely, admitting he had been just a stupid, horny kid who didn't know any better. He told me how he was now happily married and even more ashamed of what had happened. "Especially because you were always my favorite teacher. I am so ashamed of what I did. I will always regret it." He confessed that he had told his wife about his past indiscretions, and she was initially outraged. He had a hard time convincing her to marry him because she couldn't be with someone who didn't respect marriage vows. In the end, he convinced her that he had learned from his mistakes. I hope that in time, I can convince her of the same thing. "No need, Alex. It was 20 years ago. Ancient history. I appreciate your apology. It's more than I ever got from Alina. Anyway, we've all moved on. How about going back to being an old teacher and alumnus?" I suggested. Then, I did something I never thought I would be able to do. I shook his hand. I also managed to slip into the conversation that my medical problems had long since been solved, perhaps to his embarrassment. People don't like to think of retirees having an active sex life, but it's a reality. Now, every time I see Alex, we laugh and joke. I always make sure to tell him to be careful on the stairs on his way out, a playful reminder of how far we've all come. Brenda and I continue to enjoy our life together, our love growing stronger each day, proving that true happiness is possible even after the darkest times.